Let me ask you something personal. When you check your bank account, do you feel calm? Not excited? Not optimistic? Just calm. Because for most people, checking their money doesn't feel neutral. It feels like checking the weather before a storm. You're not panicking, but you're alert, a little tense. Like you're bracing for bad news, and that feeling isn't random. It's your brain doing math faster than you can explain. Because deep down, you know something most people don't like admitting. You're not worried about money itself. You're worried about momentum, about whether things are actually moving forward or just barely holding together. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most people believe wealth grows slowly and evenly, like a straight line. Save $1, get $1 closer. Save more, move forward at the same pace. Logical, comforting, completely wrong. Money doesn't grow like a line. It grows like a snowball rolling downhill. Painfully slow at first, embarrassingly slow. So slow that most people quit before it even starts working. And that's why today matters, because there are 3 specific net worth milestones where everything changes. Not emotionally, mathematically. 3 points where money stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like leverage. And once you cross them, your entire relationship with money shifts. Not because you suddenly became smarter, but because the math finally caught up. Now, before we go further, let's clear something up. This is not a get-rich-quick story. This is not about flashy trades, crypto miracles, or quitting your job next Tuesday. This is about reality. American reality. Bills, inflation, taxes, 401ks, IRAs, index funds, the boring stuff that actually works. And yes, we're going to make jokes. Because if you can't laugh at money stress, it wins. So let's start at the beginning. The first milestone, the one everyone talks about and almost no one respects enough. $100,000. Now, when people hear that number, they usually think one of 2 things. Either, that's impossible for someone like me, or that's only 10% of $1 million. Big deal. Both reactions are wrong, and that misunderstanding is exactly why most people never build real wealth. Here's the truth. Your first $100,000 is not 10% of the journey. It's more like 50% of the effort. Because before this point, you're doing almost all the work. After this point, your money finally clocks in for its shift. Let's put real numbers on this. Say you invest $500 a month. That's not nothing, but it's also not superhero-level sacrifice. That's a few dinners out, some subscriptions, a couple of impulsive Amazon decisions you don't even remember making. Invested consistently, long-term, historically reasonable returns. Nothing fancy. At around a 7% average annual return, it takes roughly 8 years to hit your first $100,000. 8 years. That sounds long, until you realize something uncomfortable. 8 years are going to pass anyway. The question isn't whether time will move, it's whether you'll have something to show for it. And during those first 8 years, here's what's really happening. Most of that money is yours. Your contributions, your discipline, your patience. Compound interest is there. But it's like an intern. Present, helpful, mostly just watching. This is the phase where people get discouraged. They look at their account, they see modest gains, and they think, this isn't worth it. And they quit, right before the math turns in their favor. Because once you hit $100,000, something subtle changes. Your money starts making noticeable money. Not life-changing yet, but meaningful. At this point, your investments can generate around $7,000 a year on average. That's not quit-your-job money, but it's also not imaginary. That's money you didn't work extra hours for, money that showed up while you were busy doing literally anything else. And here's the part most people miss. From this point forward, growth accelerates. Not because you're saving more, but because the base is bigger. It no longer takes another 8 years to add the next $100,000. It takes closer to 5. Same effort, same contributions, different result. That's compound interest waking up. And this is why the first milestone matters so much psychologically. Before $100,000, progress feels fragile. After it, momentum becomes visible. And visible momentum changes behavior. People who cross this line stop asking, "Is this even working?" They start asking, "How do I avoid messing this up?" Now let's talk about the second milestone, the one nobody really explains properly. Around $650,000? This number isn't magic. It's functional. At this level, something strange happens. Your investments can generate income that actually matters in real life. At roughly 8% returns, $650,000 can produce around $50,000 a year. Now pause for a second. That's not lottery money, but that's also not trivial. That's a serious portion of the median household income in the United States. And here's where psychology shifts again. Because once your money can cover a large chunk of your expenses, work stops feeling like survival. It becomes optional effort. You still work, but you're no longer working from fear. You negotiate differently. You tolerate less nonsense. You stop thinking in terms of, "I can't afford to upset anyone." That's not arrogance. That's leverage. This is the stage where people start breathing differently. Losing a job becomes inconvenient, not catastrophic. Taking time off becomes possible, not terrifying. You don't feel rich. You feel stable. And stability is intoxicating. Now let's address the final milestone, the one everyone knows, the one everyone underestimates. $1 million. No, it doesn't mean private jets. No, it doesn't mean yachts. Inflation made sure of that. What it does mean is something far more valuable. Psychological security. At $1 million invested, even conservative returns can generate $40,000 to $50,000 annually. Before Social Security. Before any other income. That's when fear finally shrinks. Not disappears, but shrinks. You realize you're no longer one bad year away from disaster. And here's the twist. Reaching this milestone doesn't make you reckless. It makes you careful in a smarter way. You understand opportunity cost. You understand time. You understand that money is no longer the bottleneck. Decision-making is. And once you see that, you never look at spending the same way again. But here's the real punchline. Most people never reach any of these milestones. Not because they can't, but because they quit in the slow part. The boring part, the part where discipline matters more than motivation. In the next part, we're going to break down why most people quit right before the curve bends upward. Why high earners still feel stuck. And how compound growth punishes impatience more brutally than ignorance. Now let's talk about why so many smart, hardworking people never reach those milestones. Not because they're lazy, not because they're bad with money, but because the middle is psychologically brutal. The middle is where progress feels invisible. At the beginning, everything feels motivating. You open a new account, you make your first contribution, you feel responsible, adult, like you've finally joined the people who have their life together. Then reality sets in. Balances move slowly. Markets wobble. Inflation shows up like an uninvited guest who eats all your snacks and never leaves. And suddenly the question appears, what's the point? This is where most people quietly exit the game. They don't announce it. They just stop increasing contributions. They pause investing for a bit. They tell themselves they'll restart when things feel better. But things rarely feel better on their own. This is the trap. Because compound growth doesn't reward enthusiasm, it rewards consistency. And consistency is boring. painfully boring. Let's talk about income for a moment, because income alone doesn't create wealth. If it did, high earners wouldn't feel stressed. But many of them do. Some of the most financially anxious people earn very good money. Why? Because income without structure just raises the stakes. Bigger house, bigger car, bigger lifestyle, bigger fixed costs. Now you're running faster, but the treadmill got longer. This is lifestyle inflation. And it's sneaky. You don't feel reckless. You feel normal. Everyone around you is doing the same thing. Upgrading, expanding, committing future income before it arrives. This is why net worth, not income, determines freedom. Net worth is what stays when income stops. And if income ever pauses, even briefly, the illusion gets exposed. Now let's talk about debt. Because debt isn't always evil, but it is always heavy. Mortgages, student loans, car payments, credit cards. Each one feels manageable on its own. Together, they shape your behavior. They limit how long you can wait.
They limit how much risk you can tolerate.
They turn small disruptions into stress events. This is why people with similar incomes can feel completely different financially. One has margin, the other has obligations. Margin creates options, obligations create pressure, and pressure changes decisions. Now let's talk about investing behavior, because this is where intelligence gets overridden by emotion. When markets go up, everyone feels smart. When markets go down, panic shows up. People check their accounts more often. They read headlines they didn't read before. They feel the urge to do something. That urge is expensive. Historically, the average investor underperforms the market not because of bad investments, but because of bad timing. Buying after excitement. Selling after fear. Savings and milestones protect you from that. When you have a solid foundation, volatility feels annoying, not threatening. You don't need to sell at the worst possible time. You don't need to chase reassurance. You can wait. And waiting is where returns actually come from. Now let's talk about time again. Because money problems are rarely just money problems. They're time problems. When you're financially stretched, everything feels urgent. Every decision feels like it has consequences you can't afford. That constant urgency shortens your thinking. You focus on the next month, not the next decade. But wealth is built by people who can think long-term. And long-term thinking requires safety. This is why emergency funds matter more than people want to admit. They're not exciting, they don't compound, they don't impress anyone. But they create psychological breathing room. And breathing room allows patience. Now let's talk about patience. Patience isn't about personality. It's about position. When you're exposed, patience feels risky. Waiting feels dangerous. So you rush. You settle. You accept less than ideal outcomes just to end discomfort. Savings and net worth milestones flip that. They make waiting affordable. And waiting gives you leverage. In negotiations, in investing, in life. Now here's something people don't like hearing. Wealth is built more by avoiding mistakes than by making brilliant moves. Not blowing up matters more than hitting home runs. And the biggest mistakes usually happen under stress. Stress causes panic selling, impulse spending, bad debt decisions, overconfidence after short-term wins. Milestones reduce stress, not completely, but enough to keep you rational. Now let's talk about comparison, because comparison quietly kills progress. You see people online who seem ahead. New cars, new houses, vacations, upgrades. What you don't see is their balance sheet, their debt, their stress, their lack of margin. Net worth is invisible, and that's why it's so powerful. You can be ahead financially and still look behind socially. That's fine. That's the trade-off. And it's worth it. Now let's talk about the moment people start to feel different. It's not when they buy something big. It's when a problem appears, and they don't panic. The car repair doesn't derail the month. The medical bill doesn't trigger debt. The job change feels manageable. That's when people realize something important. Money stopped being the main character in their life. It became a supporting role. And that's the goal. Not obsession, not deprivation, control. Now let's zoom out. Why do these milestones change everything? Because they change how you experience uncertainty. Before, uncertainty feels threatening. After, it feels manageable. Before, risk feels reckless. After, it feels calculated. Before, time feels scarce. After, time feels flexible. That shift is profound, and it's available to people who never become rich in the flashy sense. Now let's address something honestly. This path isn't glamorous. There are no viral moments, no overnight success stories, no dramatic turning points, just steady progress. Automatic contributions, long-term thinking, ignoring noise. It's boring, and boring works. In the next part, we're going to talk about what happens psychologically after you cross these milestones, how identity changes, why people stop sabotaging themselves, and why money finally starts to feel like a tool instead of a source of anxiety. Let's talk about what actually changes after you cross those milestones. Not on paper, in your head. Because money doesn't change your life by itself. It changes how you think, and how you think changes everything else. Before milestones, money feels loud. Every purchase asks a question. Every decision comes with tension. Even good news feels fragile, like it might not last. After milestones, money gets quieter. Not silent, but quieter. And when noise drops, clarity shows up. This is where identity starts to shift. Before, many people secretly think of themselves as bad with money. They don't say it out loud, but it shows up in avoidance. They delay checking accounts. They procrastinate on decisions. They hope things somehow work out. Crossing a real milestone breaks that story. You now have evidence. Evidence that you can plan, that you can stick with something boring, that you can delay gratification without your life falling apart. That proof changes how you see yourself. And once self-image changes, behavior follows. You stop sabotaging progress. You stop making excuses. You stop pretending the problem is you. Now let's talk about fear. Because fear is the invisible tax most people pay. Fear of job loss, fear of market drops, fear of unexpected bills, fear of saying no. Fear is expensive. It makes you accept bad deals. It makes you avoid opportunities. It makes you choose comfort over growth. Milestones shrink fear. They don't eliminate it, but they put it in its place. Fear becomes information, not a command. That's a big difference. Now let's talk about work again. Because your relationship with work changes dramatically once money stops being the emergency contact. Before milestones, work equals survival. You don't just need the job. You need the job to not wobble. That makes you agreeable. Over-accommodating. Quiet when you shouldn't be. After milestones, work becomes an exchange. You offer value. You expect value in return. You negotiate. You push back politely. You leave situations that no longer make sense. Not dramatically, just deliberately. That's power. Quiet power. Now let's talk about time. Because time is the real currency here. Before milestones, time feels scarce. You're always catching up, always behind, always planning around the next obligation. After milestones, time stretches. Not because you have more hours, but because urgency fades. You don't rush decisions. You don't react immediately. You think. And thinking improves outcomes more than effort ever did. This is why people with financial buffers often seem calmer, not lazy, not disconnected, calm, because their nervous system isn't constantly scanning for danger. Now let's talk about investing from a different angle. Most people think investing success comes from intelligence. It doesn't. It comes from behavior. The ability to do nothing at the right time, the ability to ignore noise, the ability to stick to a plan when emotions want control. Milestones support that behavior. When your foundation is solid, market volatility feels like weather. Annoying, sometimes inconvenient, but not existential. You don't sell at the worst moment. You don't chase the latest trend. You don't confuse activity with progress. You wait, and waiting compounds. Now let's talk about spending. Because spending habits change in a subtle way. Before milestones, spending is often emotional. Stress relief, reward, distraction. After milestones, spending becomes intentional. You still enjoy life. You just stop buying things to feel okay. You stop spending to prove something. You stop upgrading by default. That alone saves more money than most budgets ever will. Now let's talk about comparison, because comparison quietly ruins financial peace. You see people online with better stuff, better homes, better cars, better vacations, and you assume they're ahead. But net worth doesn't show up in photos. Debt doesn't trend. Stress doesn't go viral. Milestones make comparison irrelevant. You stop measuring yourself against appearances. You measure against stability, against options, against time. And that's a game you can actually win. Now let's talk about mistakes. Because mistakes don't disappear after milestones. You'll still make them. You'll still misjudge situations. You'll still spend money on things that don't age well. The difference is, mistakes stop being catastrophic. They become educational, recoverable, cheap. And cheap mistakes are the best teachers. Now here's something people rarely talk about. After milestones, you stop fantasizing about escape. You don't dream about quitting everything. You don't obsess over what if. Because your current life stops feeling like a trap. That doesn't mean you stop wanting more. It means you stop needing a miracle. And that mental shift is huge. Now let's zoom out. Why do these milestones matter so much? Because they change your relationship with uncertainty. Before, uncertainty feels dangerous. After, it feels manageable. Before, risk feels reckless. After, it feels calculated. Before, time feels scarce. After, it feels flexible. That's the transformation, and it doesn't require being a genius. It requires patience, consistency, and not quitting during the boring part. Now let's address something honestly. This path isn't flashy. There are no viral moments, no dramatic turning points, just quiet progress, automatic contributions, long-term thinking. Ignoring noise. It's boring, and boring wins. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people never reach these milestones, not because they can't, but because they stop too early. They quit when progress feels slow. They react to short-term noise. They underestimate how close they actually are. Compound growth punishes impatience more brutally than ignorance. Now think about what happens when enough people don't understand this. You get a society where everyone feels busy but insecure. Where income rises but stress doesn't fall. Where people work harder and still feel behind. That's not coincidence. That's a system built around urgency. And stepping out of urgency is an act of rebellion. In the final part, we're going to bring everything together. We'll talk about the illusion of normal, why the system thrives on pressure, and how to step into financial calm without becoming rich, miserable, or obsessed. And yes, we'll end with something that actually sticks. At some point, a strange realization hits you. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough to stick. You start noticing that almost everyone seems busy, but very few people seem calm. People are working, grinding, optimizing, listening to productivity podcasts like their background noise for anxiety, and yet the tension never really leaves. Because most people aren't building security. They're maintaining momentum. They're running just fast enough to keep everything from falling apart. And the system loves that, because urgency is profitable. When you're rushed, you don't negotiate. When you're stressed, you pay extra to make problems disappear. When you're tired, you accept bad terms just to move on with your life. That's not weakness. That's design. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear clearly. The system doesn't reward intelligence. It rewards positioning. It rewards people who can wait, and waiting requires margin. Without margin, you're forced into the short game. Paycheck to paycheck, bill to bill, problem to problem. With margin, urgency loses its grip. And urgency is where most expensive mistakes are made. That's why financial calm feels almost rebellious. You stop reacting, you pause, you think, and thinking breaks the cycle. Now let's talk about normal. Because normal in America is expensive. Normal is financing cars longer than you'll own them. Normal is subscriptions you forgot existed until the price went up. Normal is lifestyle upgrades that quietly lock you into higher fixed costs. Normal looks stable, but it's fragile. One missed paycheck, one medical bill, one unexpected repair. And suddenly the whole structure shakes. Building net worth exposes that fragility, not to scare you, but to free you. Because once you see how thin the line actually was, you stop chasing appearances. You start prioritizing resilience, and resilience is the most underrated form of wealth there is. Here's the paradox. People think financial freedom looks exciting. It doesn't. It looks boring. Emergency funds, index funds, long-term thinking, saying no to things that don't actually improve your life. From the outside, it doesn't impress. From the inside, it feels incredible. It feels like not panicking when something breaks. It feels like not checking your account before every decision. It feels like knowing you'll be okay. That's the reward nobody markets. Because calm doesn't sell. You have to build it. Now let's kill the biggest myth of all. That earning more automatically fixes everything. It doesn't. Higher income without structure just raises the stakes. Bigger payments, bigger commitments, bigger pressure. That's why so many high earners still feel trapped. They didn't build margin. They built obligations. Net worth milestones simplify life. They reduce forced decisions. They reduce fear-based spending. They reduce dependence. And reduction is power. Now zoom out. What do these milestones really represent? They're not finish lines. They're thresholds. Moments where fear stops making decisions for you. Moments where time starts working with you instead of against you. Moments where money becomes a tool instead of a threat. That's why they matter, not because of what money buys, but because of what it removes. Panic, urgency, desperation. Those are expensive. Now let's be honest. Crossing these milestones doesn't make life perfect. You'll still make mistakes. You'll still waste money sometimes. You'll still have bad months. That's life. The difference is those moments won't define you. They won't knock you off balance. They'll just be experiences. And learning is cheap when you're stable. This is why people who reach these levels rarely go back. Not because they're disciplined, because they're aware. They've felt the difference between reacting and choosing. And once you've felt that, going back feels unbearable. Now let's bring this home. This channel isn't about hype. It's not about flexing. It's not about pretending money is easy. It's about understanding how the game actually works. so you can stop blaming yourself and start positioning yourself. If this video made you uncomfortable in a useful way, if it explained feelings you've had for years but never named, if it made you rethink what normal actually costs, then do 3 simple things. First, subscribe. Not because we promise shortcuts, but because this channel exists to talk about money honestly, intelligently, and without treating you like an idiot. Second, like the video. Not for ego, but because it helps this message reach people who need clarity instead of noise. And third, send this video to one person. One real person, someone you actually care about, someone you'd want to have a real conversation with about money, life, and the future. Not to lecture them, just to open the door, and finally, leave a thoughtful comment. Not great video. Tell us what hit. What surprised you? What you're going to look at differently? Because this wasn't made casually. It was built carefully. For people who think deeply and still enjoy a little sarcasm along the way. Money doesn't have to control you, but you do have to understand it. And now, you do.